At my sister's graduation, my parents stood in front of hundreds and disowned me. No warning, no whisper beforehand. Just a speech filled with flowery praise for her. And a single sentence that erased me like I'd never existed. They left my name off the program, off the invitations, off the family entirely. But what they didn't know was that I had already uncovered their secret stolen property, forged documents, a house sold behind my back. And today wasn't just Kaylee's graduation. It was the last day I stayed silent. My name is Jenna Whitmore, and the moment my father lifted that microphone, I decided, if they wanted a scene, I'd give them something unforgettable before we dive in. Have you ever been cut out by the very people who were supposed to love you most, like you were just a loose thread in their perfect image? Tell me where you're listening from. Have you ever had to choose between your truth and your family? This story isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are when everyone else tries to erase you. And if you've ever felt invisible, stay with me because this time the ghost gets the final word. My name is Jenna Whitmore. I'm 28 years old and I live in a second-floor apartment above a flower shop in Somerville, Massachusetts. It's quiet, a little drafty in the winter, but it's mine. I work for a nonprofit that provides college support to students aging out of foster care. The irony doesn't escape me helping other people feel seen when my own family has spent years trying to pretend I don't exist. Growing up, I wasn't invisible. Not at first. I was the kid who alphabetized the spice rack without being asked, who stayed late after school to help mom finish centerpieces for donor galas, who learned how to proofread tax reports by age 13, just to be useful when the foundation was short on interns. My parents, Everett and Marlene Whitmore, ran the Whitmore Family Trust, a big name in Boston philanthropy circles. Always hosting events, always being honored for something, always performing. Because that's what it was, performance. And in every single performance, Callie, my little sister, was the golden star, the Harvard-bound prodigy, the glowing pride of the family. I didn't resent Kaylee. Not at first. I loved her, protected her, covered for her when she broke curfew, helped with her scholarship essays, sat through dress fittings, gave up my own prom because mom said it would be too much to buy dresses for us both. I told myself that one day things would even out, that the spotlight would widen. That being the quiet one just meant I'd get my moment later, but later never came. Instead, the edits began small at first. A cropped photo, a family newsletter where my name was buried in the last line. Then came the bigger things. A birthday party I wasn't invited to because Kaylee needed the attention. A holiday card where I was photoshopped out, literally erased, replaced with a Christmas tree. I laughed it off until it stopped being funny. The worst part, it wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel. It was silent, polite erasure, the kind that's hard to name, even harder to prove. And still, I showed up every time I showed up when Kaylee won her first academic award. When mom hosted a charity auction and forgot to give me a name tag. When dad got a Lifetime Achievement Award and only thanked the women who shaped his legacy, meaning mom and Kali, I kept showing up even when it hurt. Because some part of me, some child version of myself still hoped they'd see me. That maybe I was wrong, maybe I was overreacting, maybe I just had to try harder. So when Kaylee's Harvard graduation came around, I didn't hesitate. I ordered a new blazer. I bought a train ticket to Cambridge. I even took the day off work telling my boss I had family obligations, which was technically true, even if those obligations didn't exactly return the favor. I knew I hadn't been formally invited. No envelope, no RSVP. But I figured maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe someone forgot to click send. That morning, I arrived early. The sky was clear and the sunlight poured over Harvard Yard like some kind of cinematic blessing. Everywhere I looked, students in caps and gowns, families carrying bouquets and balloons, proud parents posing for pictures. And there in the reserved section were my parents, my mother in a pale blue suit, that same tight smile she always wore when cameras were nearby. My father in a gray blazer tapping his phone like he was counting down seconds. And in between them, Kaylee glowing in crimson robes and gold honor cords, Harvard's own poster child. They didn't notice me right away, but when they did, my mother's voice was flat. "Oh, Jenna, you came." I smiled through the sting. "I got the invitation," she chuckled. Must have been forwarded, we weren't sure the guest list reached that far. No hug, no welcome. Just enough civility to stay polished. Kaylee gave me a brief hug, shoulders stiff, eyes darting to our mother. "You look amazing," I told her. "Thanks," she whispered. "I'm glad you're here," but even then I could see it. She was already calculating how much warmth she was allowed to show. When I walked up to the guest check-in, they handed me a white badge. No crest, no ribbon. Just the word guest, in plain times. New Roman, I clipped it to my lapel. It was the same lapel where years ago I used to wear the gold family pin Mom gave out at foundation galas. But this time, no pin, no name, just a seat in the far left section next to a stranger's sleeping grandfather, and the uneasy feeling that I was about to witness my own funeral alive and awake. The ceremony began at 11:03 sharp. The president of the university spoke first, followed by a dean, then a student valedictorian with a bright voice and trembling hands. I barely heard any of it. I sat alone under the shade of the leftmost canopy, my folding chair just slightly tilted on uneven grass. Around me, families leaned in close, whispering inside jokes and passing Kleenex. On the stage, Kaylee beamed modestly. Her sash shimmered when she moved. I kept my back straight. Hands on my lap, badge clipped to my jacket, guest. That word stared up at me every time I glanced down, like a label, like a boundary. I'd helped design the Whitmore Foundation crest, once chose the typography myself. Back when I was 15 and hungry to be part of something. Now it felt like that girl had died, and I'd shown up to her memorial in disguise. Then it happened. My father stepped onto the stage, Everett Whitmore in his pressed suit and polished grin. The crowd offered polite applause, familiar with his name, if not his face. He adjusted the microphone like he was preparing for office. Today he began, we celebrate the brilliance of Kaylee Whitmore, a daughter whose intelligence, grace, and resilience reflect the very best of this institution and of our family legacy. Polite applause again. My stomach tightened. But today is also a turning point. He continued, for our family, I stopped breathing. We believe in values, integrity, focus, and unity. And as such, we've made a difficult decision. He paused, not for emotion, but for effect. From this day forward, we will no longer extend ourselves to those whose actions no longer align with the vision we hold. I already knew what was coming. That includes our youngest daughter, Jenna. The silence was heavy, no gasps, just a ripple of discomfort. A few heads turned toward the back row where I sat unmoving. Someone behind me whispered, "Did he just say?" Another voice, low and confused, "Who does that at a graduation?" My throat burned. I didn't cry. I didn't stand. I stared at the stage at the edge of the podium as if it were the only solid thing holding me together. Kaylee didn't move. She didn't speak. Her expression didn't shift, not even a flicker. She just blinked slowly and looked down at her shoes. The rest of my father's speech was a blur, something about legacy, something about weeds and roots. I remember rising to my feet, but not how I did it. My legs moved on their own. I walked out of the tent, not rushed, not broken, just numb. Outside, the sunlight felt wrong, the air too warm, the sounds too cheerful. I walked the path to the reception lawn on autopilot, my heels clicking like clock hands. There was a table with a calligraphy sign, the Whitmore family and guests. I scanned the name cards. Kaylee's name, bold and central, Aunt Meredith. Even Kaylee's freshman roommate from Yale, but not mine. No seat, no card, not even a placeholder. A girl I hadn't seen since high school looked up and blinked. "Oh hey, I didn't know you were coming. Your mom told everyone it was a closed celebration." She smiled politely, like that wasn't cruel at all. I didn't answer. On the table sat a single ivory card. Folded like an invitation, I opened it to our only daughter, Kaylee, with all our love, Mom and Dad. That was the moment, not when they said it, not when they left me off the program, but when I read that line. Only daughter, something inside me. Tilted, not broke, not shattered, just realigned. Like the foundation of a house shifting after years of silent pressure, I wasn't mourning anymore. I was waking up, then came the comment that sealed it. A woman in a floral dress holding a champagne flute passed by and smiled. "You must be with the catering team. You're not wearing the family pin." She wasn't being cruel, just honest. I looked down at my badge. Guest, not Whitmore, not daughter, just Temporary, I smiled at her quietly, tightly, picked up a glass from the passing tray, and began walking away. Not toward a table, not toward anyone. I didn't go home. Not yet. I walked for hours past cafes filled with laughter families crowding for photos. Toddlers in Harvard merch. The city buzzed around me like I wasn't real, and maybe I wasn't not to them. But that night when I got home and took off my shoes, I realized something. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me, and I wasn't going to stay erased. That night, I didn't cry. I sat on the floor of my apartment, still in my blazer knees, pulled to my chest. The graduation badge guest tossed beside me like an old receipt. On the coffee table lay a yearbook from Kaylee's high school graduation. I hadn't touched it in years, but somehow my hand reached for it like muscle memory. I flipped to the back, the tribute pages. There it was, a full-page message from my parents, to the daughter who never gave up. "We are so proud of you, Kaylee." A family photo. Kaylee in the middle, Mom and Dad on either side, standing on our old porch. I remembered that photo. I had been there. I stood right next to Kaylee in that exact spot in a dress Mom had picked for me. I even remembered how she yelled at me for getting a wrinkle across the waist. But in this version, I was gone. Cropped out cleanly, not an accident, not an oversight, intentional. And that was the first time the anger started to bloom. Not loud, not explosive, but steady and cold. It wasn't grief anymore, it was something sharper. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred. They didn't forget me. They rewrote history to make it like I was never there. I stood up, walked into my bedroom, and pulled out a shoebox from under my bed. Inside were all the things they didn't know I'd kept. An old copy of my grandmother, Elise's handwritten will, the first draft of the family foundation's crest with my notes in the margins, birthday cards addressed to both our girls before Kaylee turned 12, a printed copy of a foundation board memo from years ago where my name was listed, then scratched out, and at the bottom of the box, a folder inside it was a login sheet. From when I used to help with the foundation's accounting system during college, I had created the shared cloud structure myself. Back when they still pretended I mattered, I hadn't logged in for years, but that night I opened my laptop, clicked the old bookmarked link, and entered my credentials. Access granted typical. They erased people with speeches, not with passwords. Inside the shared folders were hundreds of files, tax returns, meeting notes, donation receipts. Most of it was ordinary until one file caught my eye. Holdings updated PDF, I clicked. It was a property transfer authorization, a legal document. And my name, Jenna Elise Whitmore, was typed clearly at the top. Just above a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. The J loop was wrong, the E too wide, the slant too straight. It had been forged not poorly, but not perfectly either. I pulled out an old lease agreement from my drawer, compared signatures. No match. Then I read the notary line, Savannah Whitmore. My cousin, my mother's niece. Of course. That's when it hit me they hadn't just disowned me. They'd forged my name to remove me from the deed to our family's summer house, the one my grandmother left for both of us. The one I painted shutters on every summer. The one Kaylee threw her 30th birthday at without even inviting me. This wasn't petty. This was criminal. At 2:43 a.m., I picked up the phone and called the only person in my family who had ever treated me like I mattered, Aunt Rose. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "Jenna, honey, is everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I found the deed they used my name, but it's not my signature." There was silence on the other end. Then a sigh, long and sad. "You saw it," she whispered. Not a question, a confession. "You knew I didn't know what to do," she said. "Your mama told me it was just paperwork, that they were tidying things up for tax season. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't, I know," she said quietly. "I should have said something." Another long pause. Then her voice cracked. "You know how your mother gets. And your father, he just follows." That sentence sat in the dark, like a ghost in the room. And then I said something I never thought I'd say not to her. "I'm done making excuses for them. I know, baby, I know." We sat in silence, the only sound the rain starting to tap against the window. A soft, steady rhythm, like the world agreeing with me. By the time the sun started to rise, Something inside me had hardened. This wasn't about a seat at their table anymore. This was about truth, about identity, about taking back the piece of me they sold, like it didn't belong. I made coffee, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and started making a list: names, documents, deeds, signatures. I wasn't planning revenge, I was preparing a reckoning. By 7 a.m., my living room had turned into a war room. Legal pads covered the table. My old laptop blinked with documents I hadn't touched in years. A second cup of coffee cooled beside a stack of printed PDFs. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. I felt precise. This wasn't just about the house. It wasn't even about the forged signature. It was about a pattern of being erased slowly, quietly, efficiently, until even I began to doubt if I'd imagined it. But not anymore. Step 1, confirm the sale. I logged into the public property registry for Bar Harbor, Maine, typed in the parcel ID from the holding file. My hands trembled slightly as the results loaded: sold buyer Harbor Equity. Holdings LLC, registered agent, a business attorney based in Boston. I searched the name, and there it was on Kaylee's LinkedIn. She'd recently announced a new partnership in legacy-focused real estate. The beach house was funding her boutique firm. Step 2, find the original will. I pulled out the copy of my grandmother Elise's handwritten will. She'd left the house to the Whitmore granddaughters, not to Kaylee, not to the foundation. To us, but the signature on the transfer documents had erased me, replaced my stake with a lie, and no one thought I'd ever find out. Step 3, gather leverage. I knew I couldn't walk into my parents' office and expect truth. Not from people who had built a career on narrative. What I needed was evidence, paper trails, voice memos, anything they couldn't spin. So I went back into the shared drive, digging deeper. There were years of files, meeting notes, internal memos, strategy briefs for the foundation. And then I found it. Marketing, narrative, memo. PDF. In it was a line that stopped me cold. We only use Kaylee and outward-facing materials to maintain brand cohesion. Jenna's image does not align with current goals. No one said I didn't belong, they just removed me. Strategically, silently. I kept going. I found an old draft of the trust distribution memo before edits. My name was there, after revisions. Gone. And that was the final piece. I printed everything. Highlighted signatures. Labeled folders, A through D. Then I slid them into a dark red envelope, one my mother gave me when I was 13, filled with Whitmore stationery and a handwritten note. Always write with grace. This would be my reply. I didn't call, I didn't warn. At 9:53 a.m., I stood in front of the Whitmore Foundation building in downtown Boston, the same place I used to deliver coffee to. When I interned at 16, the same place where I'd been told to smile and stay quiet. I walked in without hesitation. The receptionist, probably an intern, smiled, unsure. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "But I think Mr. Bell will want to see this." I slid the envelope across the counter. Inside, a notarized affidavit challenging the trust amendment. The original will, a digital drive with recordings, emails, and document metadata. And a single line: "This is not a threat, it's a correction." I turned and walked out. No drama, no outburst. Just proof that night I didn't sleep again. But this time it was different. I wasn't anxious. I was alert. Ready, I opened a private email and sent duplicates to a nonprofit integrity watchdog I'd followed for years. No explanation, just a subject line: Whitmore Foundation, internal use versus public narrative. I didn't expect them to reply, but I knew they'd read it. By morning, I had a missed call from Warren Bell, the family's longtime attorney. I didn't answer. Then came the text from Aunt Rose. "Your mother's rattled. Something shook her." Good, because for the first time I wasn't playing defense. I was setting the stage. Later that week, I RSVP'd to the Whitmore Foundation's annual charity gala, an event I'd been invited to months ago, back when they were still pretending I was part of the family. I picked a simple black dress, no jewelry, no pin at the gala. I didn't mingle, I didn't try to make an entrance. I stood near the back, wine glass in hand, silent as the speeches began. My father stepped forward, smiling like always, to our only daughter Kaylee, whose light guides this family into the future. And that was when the room changed. The media team's screens behind the podium flickered. For half a second, barely more, a document appeared. property transfer authorization, Bar Harbor Estate. A watermark, unauthorized signature. It disappeared just as fast. A glitch. No, a statement. One I hadn't orchestrated but had made possible. By the time dessert was served, 3 donors had quietly exited. 1 board member never showed. I didn't say a word. But in every corner of that ballroom, people were whispering. Not about Kaylee, not about charity, about what the Whitmores were hiding, and I stood there calm. Still, because I knew the storm had only just begun. It started with a headline I hadn't even made coffee yet, when my phone buzzed 7 notifications in a row and a subject line that stopped my breath. Whitmore Foundation under fire for inheritance misconduct. Anonymous leak sparks audit. There it was, front page of a nonprofit watchdog site. The article didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. It referenced board meeting memos, private trust distributions, a property transfer, a forged signature, and the quote that broke the internet came from an audio clip. My mother's voice clear as glass. We only use Kaylee's face. Jenna doesn't fit the image we're selling, followed by my father's chuckle. We need to be careful what Jenna finds. She used to read everything. The comment section erupted. Nepotism at its finest. Erasing your daughter for optics. Sickening. This is what legacy means to them. I didn't share the post. I didn't even like it, but I read every word. My phone rang again. This time a blocked number, then another. Then a text from a PR rep I recognized from the foundation's events. We're preparing a unified statement. Would you like to include a quote? I didn't answer. That afternoon I walked past a bus stop, where a man scrolled the article on his phone. He didn't look up. He didn't know it was about me, but the foundation did. By sunset, 3 major donors had pulled out. A scholarship program was temporarily suspended. And the next day's luncheon was canceled without explanation. I stayed silent. The truth was speaking for itself. But it wasn't over. Not yet. A week later, I filed the formal petition in court. I wasn't suing for revenge. I was reclaiming what was mine, legally, ethically, and permanently. 2 weeks after that, I walked into a small Boston courtroom that smelled like old carpet and tired paper. No cameras, no dramatics, just benches and fluorescent lights. But for me, it might as well have been a stadium. Across the aisle sat my parents. My mother's blazer still perfect, her posture stiff. My father stared at the floor. Kaylee sat beside them, scrolling on her phone like it was a dentist appointment. My lawyer, Philip, stood calmly. He submitted exhibits A through E, financial records, trust documents, a copy of the original will, the affidavit from Aunt Rose, and audio. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for drama, listened silently. Then came the moment that cracked the silence. Exhibit D, a certified copy of my grandmother Elisa's original will. It clearly named both granddaughters as co-beneficiaries of the Bar Harbor property. Kaylee's hand froze mid-scroll. My mother turned to me, her voice thin. That version wasn't supposed to be final. The judge didn't blink. Intentions aren't law. Mrs. Whitmore, documents are. Philip stepped forward. We also submit Exhibit E, a recording taken from a donor prep meeting, during which the plaintiff's name and likeness are explicitly excluded from family trust materials for the sake of public image. The recording played. My mother's voice filled the room again. Jenna doesn't photograph well with our narrative. Then my father. She used to read everything. I stood calm, clear. And I still do, my mother hissed, almost trembling. You waited all this time just to destroy us. I shook my head. No. I waited so I wouldn't destroy myself in the process. The judge nodded slowly, then delivered her ruling. The Bar Harbor property shall revert to Miss Jenna Whitmore, sole rightful heir. The amended trust documents submitted posthumously are hereby invalidated. A full audit of the Whitmore Foundation is ordered. All distributions are frozen, pending investigation. Kaylee stood up and walked out without a word. My father remained seated, pale, motionless. My mother stared straight ahead, still and silent, like the image she'd spent years perfecting had finally cracked in front of her, and she didn't know how to fix it. Philip leaned over to me. You okay? I didn't answer. I just looked down at my coat. There was no Whitmore crest pinned to the lapel, just an empty spot. And yet, for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. That afternoon, I stood alone in front of the Bar Harbor house, my house, the shutters I once painted. The porch I'd sanded as a teen. I didn't plan to sell it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted it to mean something again. So I made a decision I would restore it, not for the legacy they tried to create, but for the stories they tried to erase. It would become a place for women like me, those cast aside, written off, told they didn't belong. A writing retreat. A space to be heard. That was the legacy I chose. Not the Whitmore name, but the truth that lived underneath it. 6 months later, I stood barefoot in the center of the old house in Bar Harbor. Now fully renovated, the walls had been repainted, the porch rails resanded. The scent of salt and pine still drifted through the open windows, but this time the space felt different. It wasn't a relic of someone else's legacy anymore. It was mine. The house had been transformed into a small retreat space for young women aging out of foster care, writers, artists, storytellers, girls who'd been left out of photos, forgotten in family trees, spoken over in rooms where they once belonged. We didn't call it a foundation, we called it the quiet room. There was no gala, no donors, no newsletter, just mismatched chairs, open notebooks, and stories that finally had space to breathe. On the front wall, hung beside the doorway, was a bronze plaque. Nothing elaborate, just a few lines etched into metal. For those they tried to erase, and those who refused to stay, erased. I ran my fingers along the letters, remembering my grandmother Elise, the woman who left me that house, not just in property, but in spirit. She always said, "What's written down matters." She was right. I never returned to the Whitmore Foundation. Not once. I read in a small Boston news brief that it had temporarily suspended operations after the audit donations had dried up. Kaylee was no longer listed as part of the leadership team. My parents never reached out. Not a call. Not a letter. And strangely, that didn't hurt anymore. I'd spent years waiting for them to see me, to change, to care. But healing didn't come from their apology. It came from finally choosing myself. There was one letter, though, unexpected. Kaylee. It arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, just 10 words, handwritten in her sharp, slanted script. "You were right, I'm sorry it took this to see it." I didn't write back, I didn't need to. That letter now sits in a small wooden box beside my old family pin. Yes, the gold crest Mom used to wear to every gala. I kept it. Not as a symbol of belonging, but as a reminder of how far I've come. I don't need a family that erases me. I built one from the silence they left behind. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. Not in shouts, but in small, quiet absences. Your name missing from a card. Your photo cropped out. Your voice not invited to speak. I used to think that if I just kept showing up, if I stayed quiet, if I tried harder, they'd make space for me again. But I've learned something deeper. You can't heal in the same place that broke you. And sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever do is walk away without burning it all down. Just walk away and build something better. That house in Bar Harbor. It's not just a building, it's proof that legacy isn't what they leave you. It's what you create from what they couldn't destroy. If you've ever been written off, disowned, or erased, you're not alone, you're not invisible, and you don't need their table to matter. You can build your own. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had to choose truth over blood? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe Jenna deserved better, drop a see you below. Because here we honor the ones they tried to erase. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Tales for more true stories that hit hard every single day.